Thank you for joining us today. I will now pass the mic over to Tim Blute, Director of the Center for Best Practices at NGA.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be with you all today. I'm honored to be joined by such an esteemed panel, in particular, the National Governors Association's Vice Chair, Governor Hutchinson of Arkansas. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Timothy Blute, and I direct the Center for Best Practices at the National Governors Association. However, I got my start in NGA working on the cybersecurity team just after its inception about 7 years ago. And I know over the last several years of our cybersecurity work, workforce development in particular has been central to so much of the work at NGA and the work that's been going on across the country, in the states, in the private sector, and in academia. I know we've hosted numerous conversations on how states can recruit and retain top-flight cyber talent for their own needs to protect their own networks, but also how can states foster a strong pipeline of cybersecurity talent to fill the thousands of open jobs across the country. So I'm really looking forward to this discussion, and I think we're going to have a really outstanding discussion with our panelists. So I'm going to take a minute just to introduce each panelist, and then I will kick it off with some questions. So as I mentioned, we're joined today by NGA's Vice Chair, Governor Asa Hutchinson of the state of Arkansas. We're also joined by former Governor Janet Napolitano, who is also the former Secretary of Homeland Security and President of the University of California. We're also joined by Teresa Carlson, the Vice President of Worldwide Public Sector at Amazon Web Services. And also, last but not least, Todd Thibodeau, apologies, Todd, the CEO of CompTIA. So with that, I'm going to kick it off with an opening question to Governor Hutchinson. So Governor, as you well know, governors are unique in that they can coordinate across state agencies, industry, and academia to reach a shared goal. So how can governors steer state systems towards building a cybersecurity talent pipeline that supports a range of students, including K-12 schools and mid-career employees looking to upskill or transition into a new role? And how can states partner with industry and post-secondary institutions to achieve that?
Thank you, Tim, and I want to express thanks to the NGA for hosting this, but all the leadership that you provide in an arena of areas that support governors, that provide us with policy expertise, cybersecurity being one of those. And I'm pleased to be joined by some incredible colleagues, and I look forward to their comments as well. To your question as to how a state can overcome the silos that exist within government, and then also within education and even in the private sector, to pull all of that together to have an effective training program for our students and our workforce in the area of cybersecurity. It's not easy, but we're working hard to get that done. And first of all, the need is great. Obviously, with the attacks on our system, with the early decision I had to make for cyber insurance, which I thought, well, that's a waste of money. It wasn't a waste of money. It's been utilized numerous times, regretfully. We see the need that's there. And then most recently from foreign attacks on our systems in the United States, both the private sector to governmental entities, the public is aware of cyber threats and the need for this. It's a gray area as to students, as to what they need to do to engage in that. But we started with being the first state to mandate computer science courses to be offered in every high school. And so when we did that, we went from 1,000 students taking computer science to over 10,000 students. We increased dramatically our pipeline in education, and it naturally flows from computer science into cybersecurity. So we've continued to broaden that. So we increase our course offerings, and simultaneously with that, whenever you dramatically increase our number of students taking computer science and cybersecurity, it becomes easier to recruit industry, to showcase the talent, and it feeds off of each other. So there's a benefit to the state, there is a benefit to our students, and there's benefit to our economy in addition. The biggest challenge has been trying to bring the private sector in because they're busy. And every teacher would love to have somebody from the private sector that come in and talk about the real world of cybersecurity, to talk about what they do in software development. But making those connections has really been a challenge for us. And so we've set up some different mechanisms to make that happen. The leadership has been very supportive of it. And so we right now recognize the need. We've got a talent pool that's moving that direction. We're trying to partner with industry, and it is proving beneficial to our economy as well. So there's a lot more we can talk about as we go through this session today, but I'll turn it back to you. And thanks again for the opportunity to talk about this important issue.
Thank you, Governor. I know you have long been a national leader in promoting computer science education at the K through 12 level. And I know a number of your peer governors have looked to you for insights into how to start that up across the country. So I really appreciate your leadership and thank you for that. Governor Napolitano, I wanted to turn to you next. You obviously bring a unique perspective, having led a state, led a large federal department, and also been the president of a major university system. I think we talk a lot about the cyber threats that face our public and private sectors, but I think we don't often talk about the workforce shortage as a part of that threat. I know you've launched a cybersecurity career education and training efforts, excuse me, during your time as the Secretary of DHS, and building on all of your experience, what is your perspective on the existing cyber workforce shortage and how it impacts our ability to combat and counter those threats? And what's needed from industry, academia, and government to reverse that trend?
Well, thanks, Tim. And I also want to express my appreciation to the NGA for hosting this. And I want to say hello again to my good friend, Governor Hutchinson from the great state of Arkansas. So it's great to be on a panel with you and the other panelists as well. Look, the need for a cybersecurity workforce in the public sector cannot be overstated. It's needed at the municipal level, at the state level, and certainly at the federal level. It's in part a pipeline problem. How do we educate enough young people and then incentivize or incite and excite them about going into public service as opposed to into the private sector? And that's where the real competition is, for those who have cybersecurity training. One of the things we're talking about setting up at UC Berkeley, where I'm currently on the faculty, is a technology in the public sector program where the academics will be both on the cybersecurity, the technology side, but also an introduction into public policy and how you transfer that technological expertise into a public sector job. As part of that, we need the cooperation and help of the private sector for the private sector to provide internships, hopefully paid internships, and grants and scholarships for students who commit that once they receive their training, they will go into the public sector, at least for some certain period of time. So I think working with your state universities is critical to this effort. The University of California, which I just stepped down as president of, is the nation's largest public research university system with about 250,000 students. And a lot of them want to go into tech, but they don't think of tech in the public sector. And that's partially because they don't have exposure to what tech in the public sector means. What are the kinds of problems you get to work on? What are the kinds of challenges you get to deal with? What is the public benefit of your work? And so that's why the technological training is important, but also the excitement about why public sector as opposed to private sector.
Thanks for that, Governor. And I think you really hit on that same point that Governor Hutchinson brought up, where you have to show the exposure. You really have to make sure that students see what the path is here and what exciting opportunities exist in the public sector. And so to build on those comments, I want to turn to Teresa Carlson from Amazon Web Services. You know, Teresa, we've just heard from a current governor and a former governor around interacting and working so closely with the private sector. Obviously, from your perspective at Amazon Web Services, we'd really love to hear your efforts on how you've connected and supported the public sector, and how state education and training systems can partner with industry to create a sustainable pathway for students as they think about entering the cybersecurity field.
Thanks, Timothy. Also, Governor Hutchinson and NGA, thanks for setting this up. Governor Napolitano, I loved your work, and some of your comments you just gave so resonated around public sector, by the way, because I've been working in the public sector in industry for over 20 years. And it's the big thing I've said for a long time. We need more individuals super passionate about public sector tech work. So number one, we can have the skills that are required to build, not just be buyers, but build within government, and also to keep the technology and the infrastructure safe at every application that's being run. So I love what you were saying. And it's one of the things my team and I have really been focused on for 10 years since starting this business at AWS in the public sector around the world. And it's, by the way, one of the things, the first things I hear from every customer I have, and every provost or president of university that says, we need to do a better job, we need the skills, what do we do? And that partnership with commercial industry like AWS, I think is really important, because it takes all of us to actually make this work well. And I just wanted to make a few comments about the cybersecurity, the importance of the accreditation. It was really nice, Governor Hutchinson, to see, while I know the actual events of cybersecurity and the things you talked about early on with ransomware and attacks that you're getting, hearing you talk about cyber insurance, which just, you know, that was an unknown a few years ago. No one even knew what cyber insurance was. But to vector to what do we do about it? And it's going to have to be skills at all levels, and it can't be one and done. It's going to have to be a continuous stackable set of credentialing that goes on through things that we learn and as technology evolves. And, you know, I have the great privilege of working for one of the most innovative companies in the world, and we move really fast. I mean, even in my own career of doing this in the last 5 or 6 years, just seeing the pace of technology, which is really unbelievable, the amount of tools and new technologies and applications that are created. Well, in all those, if they're not developed properly and they're not run and managed properly, of course, all that can create risk for a government or an enterprise. So that's the reason it's important to have continual skills at all levels being taught with the newest and latest technology that's out there. And one of the things that I will share that we have really been on a fast journey to work with our customers and partners around the world, is really trying to help them understand skills that are required, and really working backwards from skills versus just a set of curriculum. That curriculum, of course, it needs to include how do you present a concept and idea? How do you write about that concept and idea? But really, at the end of the day, it's so important for the individuals, the learners, the students, to be taught the skills that matter and work backwards from there. So one of the things that we've done with our curriculum, I also run our training and certification organization worldwide, and also have our education business as part of AWS. And we, during COVID, launched 50 new courses online, and we have 500 total free courses for people to go in. Now, that doesn't mean you shouldn't go to university, but those are stackable, buildable things that you can learn in addition. And we work directly with high schools, elementary schools, and colleges and university, as well as the government directly. It's important that we have these skills built inside. And it was great to hear Governor Napolitano talk about that, because we have to embed what we're doing inside how the government and the public sector work and operate. You can't separate it all. And I do think our policymakers, our governors, I love, this is just such a great focus because at every level from the top, this has got to be talked about. And that's where it will begin and then flow down from. One of the things you talked about a stat that you've gone from 5,000 to 10,000 cyber students in Arkansas. We've seen cybersecurity as a certification around the globe be one of the hottest technology areas to be in today. And because you begin with cloud, when you begin with cloud as a curriculum, and we've created community college certifications and now university certifications with cloud computing, but then we begin to add on this additional tooling. One is cybersecurity, but again, it's not one and done. It's got to be in conjunction with the other tooling. So my point is, if you're going in and you're teaching the latest and greatest technology, then you have to build all of this with security by design. So security is an element of trust around everything that's being built. And that's the reason the elements of the latest technology along with all the tooling is so important. I just want to, I'll say one more thing and then I'll turn it over back to you, Tim. But on the point of cybersecurity and build around resiliency and how we think about operationally, how we do this, in addition to the skills, I think it's important to teach our leaders at the top, because one thing that I do hear from government leaders around the world is that they say we need training, and boards of directors will tell us, guess what? We need training in cybersecurity. So if we're a board of directors for a company, a global organization, how do we understand cybersecurity in a way that we can actually help the company be better? What are the mechanisms and tooling? And that on its own is a type of training, as well as government leaders who create the policy. Look, the policy side is as important as everything else. And what so many people miss is when you're creating these things, the policy has to overlay all this. You can't just say, oh, hey, we have the latest and greatest technology, but guess what? We don't have the policies on the way to implement it or drive it. So all these really have to come together. And I do think that's what NGA can really do. It's one of the key tenets that you can bring to the table is how do you blend both of those?
Yeah, I appreciate those comments. I think in particular what you were saying in the end there, that's been something, I think we've had, I'll say, a moderate amount of success over the last 8 years now of our cybersecurity program. We've had more sessions than I can even recall at our winter and summer meetings, engaging with governors, helping to bring them up to date on one of the most current topics in cybersecurity, and certainly events like this help to drive that message forward. So appreciate that perspective. So I want to round out our first set of questions by turning to Todd Thibodeau. As I mentioned, Todd's with CompTIA. For those of you who don't know, they're a critical partner in the training and credentialing space for computer science and cybersecurity. Todd, one of the most common challenges that we hear all the time about for skilled candidates who are looking to enter the cybersecurity field is just there's a lot of confusion over certification, degrees, experiences. You hear this, I've heard this over the years in job postings. Do you require certain certifications? Do you require a grad degree? Do you just look to experience? So we'd love to hear your thoughts on how can state leaders better understand the credential landscape, and how can post-secondary institutions align with training providers on the certification process?
Sure. Yeah, thanks for the opportunity to speak on this topic. This is certainly one of the areas that we focus on around the world. Our Security Plus certification is the most broadly adopted security credential in the world, with over 600,000 people worldwide with this credential. Doesn't matter what market you're in, doesn't matter what sector you're in. We work with academic, government, commercial, education institutions all over the world. Our products are sold and serviced in 225 countries and territories worldwide. So we have a pretty big footprint and a good perspective on cyber around the world. One of the things that's out there today, we have 700,000 open tech jobs in the industry right now. There's about 12 million people or so who work in tech in the US. About half of those people work in a purely tech role within a tech company, and then half of those people work in a tech role in a non-tech company. So the pervasiveness of some of these needs, some of these requirements, the good thing is tech is a pretty common language. So we get to see tech implemented in most situations, whether it's public sector, whether it's educational institutions, the commercial sector, the needs are relatively the same. So at least we have a good basis and framework to work from. So the industries groups like ourselves, like CompTIA and others who put together these credentials, we work through a pretty rigorous process to work with industry. We have ourselves over 3,500 subject matter experts from all over the world who come together on a routine basis to help identify the things and skills that people need to have to do these jobs. They go through thorough job task analysis. They identify the skills and learning objectives that the people need to be able to do these job roles. And those result in curriculum, they result in exams, they result in lots of other things that get utilized across the landscape. We formed a group a few years ago, which is actually called C3. It's the group of the cybersecurity credentialing organizations. And we meet on a routine basis to make sure that we're following these best practices, that we're keeping ourselves in the loop. Our exams are updated comprehensively every 3 years, but are updated on a routine basis, which also updates the curriculum. So I think what we have out there existing now, and in addition to the Amazon programs that Teresa talked about, we have a really good foundation for the training and for being able to get people into these job roles, to give them the right industry verified skills that get them into these positions. But there's a couple of things that are really holding this back. And the biggest one that we talk about over the last couple of years is something we call the confidence gap. And this gap is keeping people from being able to think that they can be in one of these tech careers, whether it's an entry-level tech career, whether it's a cyber role, whether it's some of these other things. This idea that you need to be a math and science genius, that you need to be a STEM expert to work in some of these roles is just not true. The majority of entry-level jobs, people that are doing entry-level cybersecurity work or even mid-level cybersecurity work, don't even require a college degree. You can work through, say, 9 months of quality training, learning the right kinds of skills. And I'm really glad that Teresa emphasized that point as well, because this idea that we should just cram people full of knowledge in a 3 or 5 day boot camp and then they're ready to go is just not true. And we're transitioning programs as well coming up over the next year to focus on teaching people how to do particular tasks and gain the knowledge as part of learning to do those things, so that the skills are acquired in a way that makes them more job ready on day one. Because that's one of the biggest complaints, whether you're a state employer or commercial employer, is that people who come through some of these programs aren't necessarily ready on day one. So we're trying to organize our programs so that the person is 80% job ready from day one. But getting people into that pipeline, you have to help them overcome that idea that they can't do these jobs, that these jobs require skills that they don't have or that they can't acquire. And we know that when we're able to do this, we have great success in getting people into these jobs so that they can get these life-sustaining wages. We have a program called IT Ready, which we do in a number of different cities across the country, different states, where we take people virtually no tech background, some people who have never even turned on a computer before. 8 weeks later, they're doing tech support for major companies. The same kinds of models could be followed maybe over lengthier timeframes to get people who have the potential aptitude, the desire to have one of these careers. And if you can get them over the idea that they can't acquire these skills, the pipeline opens up so much bigger for the people that come in for these jobs. And that includes people who could come in to public sector jobs. It includes people who could come in to commercial entities. But a lot of times the public sector is, if they feel like they can compete for those higher end employees, I think they need to be able to look for employees which maybe require a little bit more work. So maybe someone who comes to you 50% ready or 60% ready, and then you can bring them up the rest of the way, the kind of productivity and loyalty that I think the public sector could garner from those individuals. But it specifically relates to your question about the career pathways and about how to make sense of these certifications. We put together a career pathway mapping, which is probably the most trafficked part of our website, other than probably looking at some of the exam objectives that we have. And it details out for probably 15 to 20 different career roles and job roles in the tech sector, the pathways that you would need to follow. And as Teresa said as well, stackable credentials, being able to start with our CompTIA A+, develop Network Plus, then maybe you go a Cisco pathway, maybe you go an AWS pathway, then maybe you come back to Security Plus. And it details out the whole pathway, the amount of time that it might take you, the cost that would be incurred in those. So I'd encourage any of the people listening today to go to our website, go to CompTIA.org, look for the career pathway, and there's a whole mapping there that shows you what credentials apply to what job roles, what kinds of sequence you might follow. to get those going, and then to be able to see what you can do. So we've been working with a number of different states using funds that were provided for by the CARES Act to put in place some of these training programs. And we did a really innovative program with the state of Texas, where we took people that were in border communities, which had had a hard time finding jobs. They wanted to do this specifically around cyber. We did a 12-week boot camp with these individuals, and they acquired a series of our certifications. All the people were employed as part of the program because they got really strong employer engagement. One person who didn't even have a college degree got a job for $106,000 with a major consulting firm as a result of the program. So we've had people that have come through these various programs that we've had, but it takes a concentration of people. And I talked about our IT Ready. We have to screen 800 people to find 25 people that we think can go through the program. But all 25 of those people, all of them end up in jobs. All of them are still in jobs. We have a 92% job retention rate for the programs that we've done along this way. But it's finding the right people, making sure that you're not excluding people because they don't have college degrees, because that's certainly not a requirement for most of these jobs, and then be able to support them with continuing education, upskilling, as was talked about before, to make sure that they're doing the continuing education. All of our credentials, the ones that are ANSI and ISO accredited, require a 3-year recertification through either continuing ed, in the interim retesting. We have various mechanisms for that. And I know AWS follows the similar models for their certifications as well that keeps them current. But I think one of the challenges that we've seen for states in particular that are relying on their post-secondary institutions is that when we go in and do mappings of our learning objectives against the curriculum that a lot of state universities are providing for their students, particularly in this area, they're falling well short. We've done this with more than 20 institutions, I think just in the last year. And in a lot of cases, they were only covering about half of the things that industry said these individuals needed to know. So I think we need to do a better job, and the universities need to be more open to this input. A lot of times we get the Heisman from these people when we go in. They're like, no, we're fine, we're good. But then when we do the mapping for them, they understand that they're actually falling well short. This has been true in computer science fields in universities, and it's certainly been true in some of the technical fields. So I think being able to open yourselves up to the work that's being done by these industry consortiums and by the private sector certifications like Cisco and Amazon, Microsoft, HP, others who have been doing these in the same way that we do them, and then being able to do that mapping and take advantage of all the work that's been done. It's not as complicated as it seems when you see it all laid out and mapped and stacked, but we have to do more things to ensure individuals recognize they can do these jobs, and it doesn't take forever to acquire these skills, and it certainly doesn't take a 4-year degree.
Thanks for that, Todd. I think your points on sort of removing the intimidation factor are so important, and we'll get to a topic I want to talk about in just a few minutes around how do we bring in a diverse and underrepresented groups into this workforce. But before we turn there, Governor Hutchinson, could I ask you to talk a little bit more about your efforts in K through 12, and in particular, how did you one of the things, obviously to bring computer science into K through 12, you've got to have the teachers to teach the subject, and which requires, I'm sure, some recruiting and some retraining, and then some of them probably become attractive targets to go work in the field. So could you talk a little bit about how you work with the educators to make sure that you have these programs up and running?
Thank you, and I'd be happy to, and great comments by everybody on the panel. And I like the point that there is an intimidation factor, and that applies to teachers as well. And so when we started out our computer science initiative 6 years ago, I just become elected governor, we had 20 high school teachers across the state, 20 that were certified to teach computer science. Now we have over 500. Now, that means that we have more than one in every high school that's certified. Some have multiple teachers. Now, that's not where we want to wind up, but it is a lot of progress. Now, how did we get there? Well, first of all, it takes leadership. In other words, the fact that the governor says this is important for the state makes a difference. And so I had a French teacher say, well, if it's important for the governor and our students, if I can learn one language, French, surely I can learn computer language. So she became certified and doing an incredible job in teaching computer science now. I had an assistant football coach that heard the call for computer science teacher. He received his training, became certified, I talked to him and he just says, thank you for getting me out of 2-a-day football practices. And he's inspired a whole host of students. And so those are just two examples of those that came and responded to the call and saw that as a need for the students. Now, you know, in addition, because as you pointed out, we can lose them to industry. We train them, they have talent, they're doing a good job, they understand it, and then industry offers a lot more money than we can have in the public school environment. And so we have put an incentive program in place that if anyone can become certified as a computer science teacher, and then they teach for a year in the classroom, they get a bonus of $2,000 to $5,000. And that's a stipend that will continue. We had it first for 5 years. We've renewed it again because obviously you can't, once you give that stipend, you can't cut it back because you're going to lose them. And so that's been an incentive. It's been a retention tool as well. And we're going to have to continue to invest in that. This year, I've asked the Arkansas General Assembly to go a step further, and not just that it's mandated to be offered in every high school, but we want to mandate taking computer science as a requirement for graduation. It'll be a math or a science credit, but it will be required for every student to take it. Obviously, we're going to have to invest a lot more money in training a broader realm of computer science teachers, and we're prepared to do that. So it's about incentivizing, it's encouraging, it's about leadership, and then they want to meet the needs. Teachers are incredible. They embrace it, and they get over that intimidation factor, and that's been really inspiring to me.
Thanks, Governor. That's very helpful. I'd be curious, just as a follow-up, you must be getting, over the last 6 years, a lot of great feedback from the private sector entities in the state, right? Who now have presumably a much more sort of ready field of applicants, of interns, and then of full-time employees.
Oh, absolutely. It gives us a recruiting tool whenever we can show tech industry, but every industry has tech needs, that we have that talent pool coming through. But specifically, you know, we're trying to be, you know, we're not Austin and we're not San Jose. We're a micro hub, and we want to expand on our micro hub reputation for tech companies. And so we have software developers that are located here because of that talent pool. Industry does get excited about it. And, you know, whenever we have industry leaders like Walmart, we have, which is a logistics company, if we can't show that we have the talent to meet the needs of those industries, then those industries are at risk. And so it has been critical. And to follow up on that, you know, we've created a tech council. We've brought the industry in together with the public sector. And so you've got to build on those partnerships and let them know what we're doing as a state and how that's going to benefit their industry.
That's great. Thank you, Governor. Todd, I think you said you had a comment you wanted to make on this topic.
Yeah, I want to applaud the governor's work on this topic because the results they've had have been tremendous, being able to bring these people from alternative backgrounds. So we're trying a slightly different approach. We're doing some pilots in 6 cities, in 6 school districts right now, where what we're trying to do is create classroom facilitators. These are people who don't necessarily have deep subject matter expertise on a particular topic, but with the support of our materials, with our curriculum, and with some of our tools, the classroom facilitator is able to take the students through the programming. So some of these places which will never be able to recruit probably and retain some of these instructors that they need, this gives them the opportunity to create these facilitators, create multiples within the school so that they have this opportunity to teach the curriculum with our support, and maybe even us video casting some of the classroom training into the students, and then the facilitator is there to manage that. But it's a slightly different approach, but definitely want to applaud the governor's work. I think that's tremendous results. Congratulations.
Thanks for that, Todd. And just being cognizant of our time, I also want to make sure we turn to another important aspect of this. And, you know, there's been a lot of conversation over the last few years on how we ensure that the workforce that does work within computer science and technology and cybersecurity represents the broader population. I know there's been a lot of efforts, certainly in the private sector, to ensure that the tech workforce is both is diverse and is representative. So, I'd be curious for the panelists' general thoughts on this, but maybe I could turn to Governor Napolitano for your thoughts on this, coming from the university perspective or your time in federal or state government. How do you ensure that not only is there an able workforce pipeline, but there's also one that's representative of the population?
Well, you have to do it with persistence and intentionality. You have to say, look, we're going to have a diverse cybersecurity qualified workforce in our state. And then you go where those diverse communities are. You go to the high schools, you go to the community colleges, you go to your four-year institutions. One thing, if I were a governor today, which is a great job, by the way, it's my favorite job. One of the things I would think of doing is actually mapping out what are the exact cybersecurity needs of the workforce, because you have it at all different levels. You have folks who really need to have competencies in the day-to-day. You have folks who really need to know how to do risk mitigation and prevention. You have folks who need to know how to do forensics if an event occurs. So what I'm suggesting is that not every cybersecurity role is the same, and therefore not every cybersecurity role requires the same level of training. So to map it out and see what you really need, and then with intentionality and persistence, as I said earlier, go out and support and design the training programs or acquire the training programs. So it's something like Todd's shop that you need to achieve what your end result is going to be. A cyber workforce map.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Governor, and that builds a lot on what Todd was talking about, which is the different skills that you need for the different types of cybersecurity jobs, and it's so important to recognize that it's certainly not a monolithic skill set.
Yeah, if I were a governor today, I'd certainly be investing in cyber insurance.
Yeah, I remember when this topic first came up, when I first started in this space, and it sort of felt like everybody kind of thought we were crazy for talking about the topic. And then it felt like it went from maybe one state having cyber insurance to very quickly that number escalated, I think, as we saw more and more large companies pursue it and recognize the benefits of it. If I could, Teresa, I'd like to turn to you. A big piece of building out a diverse and long-term sustainable cybersecurity workforce is obviously recruitment, but the flip side of that is also retention. So would really welcome any thoughts you have on how your organization or other organizations can think about retaining this quality workforce. I think there's been a lot of conversations around, is the tech workforce just more mobile? Are they just going to come and go faster than the traditional workforce? And is that something we have to account for? Or, are there some concrete retention strategies that you could point to build out this workforce?
And Timothy, I will say that the diversity is really important. Like, we are not where we need to be. And that is the most important reason to make sure that we are skilling all walks of life, every corner of the culture, at all different levels. Like Todd said, like, we've got to get to all people. We can't this just can't be limited to a few. And when you can get there, I actually hire a lot more now. I will tell you, I don't always, I really pay attention to culture and skills more than I do degree. Of course, degrees are important for some things, and especially as you get higher in level of certain things you're doing, but they can build on that also at a great company. And part of retention to me is making sure that our employees feel like we are caring for them and that they have a roadmap where they can keep building on their own skills and that their training literally never ends. But I'd be crazy to say we've not had challenges during COVID. We've not seen a retention issue, which I'm really pleased about. And we saw over 600,000 women leave the workforce just in a couple of months at a I mean, it's been unbelievable. So you want to make sure you're doing everything you can at this point in time to take care of your really important employees that you work so hard to gain and then train and keep on board. but it's also kind of changed the conversation. And for us, because I have employees now in 51 countries around the world. And we're hiring like crazy. We're onboarding like crazy. And it's so important that we stay connected with them. So I've changed up some things. I really have moved totally toward doing everything digital, virtual, all hands, making sure that everyone beginning has someone, a buddy or multiples. A lot of my new account executives and my technical leads, I don't even want them getting out in the field. Not literally like you can get out in the field, but virtually get out in the field until they really kind of pass a set of bars in terms of we know that they really understand how we want them to work with our customers and partners. Because culture is I found it's much more challenging to teach virtually. And because we haven't had to do this. It's totally new. We've always been a global company, but I would get on an airplane and fly out. So I think it's, really making sure you encourage open lines of communication between employees and management. You have to really listen. We have real-time polling within AWS and Amazon where we call them connection scores, and we put them up, and they're very simple. It takes you 20 seconds or less to answer the question. And we put a lot of these up based on what we're hearing from the employees, so we can really get trending of what's happening and address it in major categories for management. And also just really, we've worked hard to make sure we're providing a system, a benefit system to our employees that they can take advantage of and manage the challenge. I tell everybody, you kind of have to manage with grace right now. I love it now. My employees, will be on calls and their children will come in and want to sit on their lap or be part of the call. And you just you can't take everything so seriously right now. I mean, you kind of have to say, we're operating with grace. We're going to be pretty patient about these things. Give folks the extra mile because everyone's been struggling with how they work. But the most important thing is really flexibility, grace, letting the employees know we're here for them. We listen and take their feedback, and we've really tried to vector to their needs around the world.
That's helpful. I appreciate that. That resonates, Teresa, as I sit here in my toddler's bedroom where I have my work from home desk set up. So I recognize that completely.
My problem is I want to take them all home, all the little ones. Mine are all grown up, so I want to take them all with me. So,
well, if this call were in about 2 hours or so, you'd probably hear a 2-year-old boy banging at the door yelling. So, Todd, building off of this, I'd like to turn to you just to talk a little bit about, one aspect of this issue is advancing opportunities through non-traditional pathways like apprenticeship programs, upskilling, boot camps. You mentioned boot camps earlier. How can industry and traditional education providers support participants in this program to encourage broad and diverse adoption and engagement?
Well, I will give a shout out and some kudos to the outgoing administration because I think they recognize the importance of these alternative pathways. And we worked with the administration on a few of these different programs and were the recipients of, along with another consulting firm, of a grant to develop some of these apprenticeship opportunities. But I think it's the recognition that a lot of these jobs, and as was described earlier, that we have these different layers of jobs that require different skills, that we really do take a look at those and say there isn't a one-size-fits-all educational model for these, that for certain of these, the employers are willing to take individuals who are coming from a particular program. And if it's a qualified system where the employer knows that the person is getting the right kinds of soft skills training, where they're getting the right kinds of work attitude training, they're getting the right kinds of accountability training along with the technical skills, they're willing to accept these people. And we know this from our IT Ready program, where employers originally, as I said, when we bring them into the mix, a lot of times employers think these individuals who come into these types of programs are broken for some reason, that they're lesser than, because they have to go into a program like this to get a job. But when they see the output of these, but this is really incumbent upon employers to make the change here. We have to remove this barrier of college degrees being the limiting factor. The college degree requirement for a lot of these jobs is the most, in some ways, the most discriminatory requirement of a lot of these job listings, because the individuals who don't have the opportunity to do that are kind of taken immediately out of that pool. So we need to get a better recognition, and the leadership of a lot of companies, including Amazon, Apple, Google, and others, where they're starting to say, hey, we're going to open up the job opportunities and the pool of individuals who don't necessarily have come from a degree to be able to get some of these jobs. Because the majority of these jobs, as I said, don't require these things, and we need to stop having that be the gatekeeper for some of these. It'll open up, it helps solve a lot of these challenges, because you have pools of people who can come into these career fields, who can find funding to go to these alternative pathway programs that don't take more than 9 months of training at the most for a lot of these, if the right kind of training is applied in these cases. But we think that's the biggest thing that needs to change. And we're trying to be very vocal on this topic. We've done that in our own jobs. We don't require college degrees for any of the postings that we have internally anymore. For our jobs, it might be listed as something, but it's not a requirement to apply for some of these to be able to bring those people in. So we need to make sure that we've done, as Governor Napolitano said, mapping out what are the true requirements for these. When we've done deep dives with employers that had tech postings where 91% were requiring college degree for the job, when we actually did the deep dive on them, sometimes it's less than 30% when they really look at it and say, well, the skills I want are these, but those aren't skills that you would necessarily acquire in a 4-year degree. Now, depending on the university program, there are some great programs in the cyberspace. The University of Maryland, Baltimore County has done some great work in the cyberspace for some of their degree programs. But by and large, most of the cybersecurity work that's done around the governance of cybersecurity within companies is done at the mid and entry level, so that we have these huge numbers of opportunities there if we can set these up. So a couple other countries have gotten pretty good systems. The UK has a very good apprenticeship system that they've made a really strong commitment to. There's other countries that do small taxes, commercial taxes on commercial entities, and that money goes into a job retraining pool that allows people to transition from career field to career field. But then you run into challenges too. Remember when the Carrier air conditioning plant in Indiana was going, they were closing that plant, and there were a bunch of workers that needed to transition. We talked to some of those workers and said, hey, we can train you for some of the tech jobs in the area. But the individuals said, no, we'd rather have our old jobs back. So you run into that barrier as well. But that relates a lot to the confidence gap and maybe the maturity of some of those individuals that didn't want to make the transition. But I think people need to know that the support is going to be there to make that transition. We need to make sure that we have the right kind of skilling for the right job, so that we don't overskill or require someone to spend a bunch of money going to school for something that wouldn't be required to do the job. And I think if we do that, we can open up the pool and we can get more people into these jobs in shorter periods of time. You shouldn't have to transition your career. You shouldn't have to go back to school and get another 4-year degree. You should be able to transition to another job much more quickly by taking shorter qualified systems training for those. And that's true of, if you want to go into marketing from some career field, you want to go into accounting from some career field, or into tech, it shouldn't be a difficult task to transition from one career to it should be easier than it is.
That's helpful. Thanks, Todd. So one last question on this topic, or one last perspective. Governor Hutchinson, I'd be curious, any thoughts you have on how you expand the diversity of the population that enters into this field, and how you all have thought about that in Arkansas?
Absolutely. We've really focused on making sure that we reduce the gender gap, that we open up our computer science training to minority groups, and we've actually had some of the largest increases in those populations. It's still not where we want it to be, but as Governor Napolitano says, it has to be intentional, and we have been intentional about that. And so we work with Women Who Code, some number of women's foundation organizations that helps us to recruit girls in coding. We have gone out, we have coding camps targeting the minority population. But in addition, and I agree with everything that's been said about we've got to be able to focus on those that are trying to be reskilled into this field. And so we have totally redone our grant programs in Arkansas, where our grant programs for going into higher education or going into different fields of study, academies, certifications, that they can access grant programs even if they're non-traditional students. So whether it's somebody that's being reskilled, somebody who got a GED long time ago, wants to get this skill, those grant programs are available to them. So we have been intentional about it. We have more work to do there. And I agree, we need to really make it what Todd was saying. We have to be able to move from one field to another field. And there's so many different aspects to this. We've got to expose our students and our populations to different parts of computer science and cybersecurity, blockchain, and IT, and let them figure out exactly where they want to be. The key is exposing them to it.
Thanks for that, Governor. That's very helpful. So being mindful of time, I've got one last question and then we'll do some closing remarks. And so my final question is actually, Governor Napolitano, I'm really curious for your thoughts on this. You mentioned that I think in our green room, you're talking about how you're starting up a new center. I'd be curious for any thoughts you have on the intersection of cybersecurity and policy making, and in particular students who are studying policy. Obviously we need an incredibly capable technology workforce to do some of the actual technical details and be able to perform those tasks. But it also strikes me as critically important that we have folks who, are leading companies and leading state government and leading the federal government who have, I guess, enough exposure to cybersecurity to implement strong policy making. Can you talk a little bit about any thoughts you have on that and what your perspective is on how we train the next generation of policymakers to understand the cybersecurity threats and challenges?
Yeah, Tim, I would take it from another direction. How do we train the next generation of cybersecurity folks to know about government, how government is organized, how it works, how you interface with government, what government is looking for, what it needs, what are the relevant departments of the government that are particularly involved in cybersecurity. So at the federal level, you think of the NSA. Well, you've got to need a 4-year degree to go to the NSA, but or plus. But the NSA, the Department of Homeland Security, has something called CISA, which has responsibility for protection of critical infrastructure from a cybersecurity perspective. So banking, your power supplies, all of that stuff. Your election systems, was particularly in the news recently, it is under CISA. The FBI, the CIA, all need, all have great government jobs that need a level of cybersecurity expertise. And so what you want to do is take those cyber competent students and expose them to that environment and to the opportunities in that environment that they will need. And then at the state level, you need professionals as well to protect your state's critical infrastructure, working with the private sector on that. Your hospitals, protecting all of those patient records from being hacked. If you have a major hack in a hospital system, all of a sudden you've got HIPAA violations and you've got the HHS Office of Inspector General all over you. You probably have some violations of state law involved. So, so exposing and educating cybersecurity competent young people to how government operates, how it's organized, and how they get into it, I think is a great opportunity right now.
That's great. I really appreciate your reframing of that question. I think you're spot on, right? Get the technical folks to understand government, and then they'll get hooked.
I will say the government folks need to understand some tech. It's kind of painful when you watch some of the congressional hearings and they have Mark Zuckerberg or somebody on the witness stand and need to know how to ask questions better. But as I said in my answer to the question, Tim, I would take it from the other direction.
Excellent. Well, I want to be mindful of time. We've got just about 5 minutes left, so I want to give our other three panelists just a chance to provide some closing remarks. So probably keep it to just about a minute each. Todd, can I turn to you first, and then Teresa, and then we'll close out with Governor Hutchinson?
Sure. I think there's so many great innovative approaches taking place right now. I really appreciate Governor Napolitano's remarks about having the governments really get their act together in terms of identifying the roles that they have and communicating that out, because it is seen as this kind of void. People don't know what kinds of jobs are in there. They think those are kind of the worst kind of jobs, when actually they may be some of the best kind of jobs, and whether that's the state or the federal level. So I think they can do some more things to identify, because the skills are so transferable between those sectors. There's nothing particular about the work that's being done there, but the critical importance of protecting our critical infrastructure, protecting our election systems, protecting all of our data. I mean, look what happened with SolarWinds. There were so many federal agencies that were part of SolarWinds, and a lot of that was around a governance issue. Nobody ever thought that they needed to check traffic that was taking place back and forth between a trusted application. You know, that's a governance issue that hit in all these different areas. So I think we can do a better job of presenting those as great options, because they are. And I'll tell you what, the DoD did a terrific job a few years ago. They looked at all their information assurance positions. They detailed exactly what the governor was talking about, what kinds of skills were required for each of those positions, and then identified a training, onboarding, and education pathway for those. And I think if the other federal agencies would take a similar approach, they would have a much better framework for recruiting the kind of talent that they need to bring in.
Thanks for that, Todd. Teresa, any last minute closing thoughts?
Well, +1 to everything Todd said, completely. You've got to treat your applications, your network, like it's your house, and you've got to look around every corner to make sure that it's secured, and generally that they can get in corners that you don't believe they can. So that's the reason it's important to take an inventory, do well architected and design. And when you're getting into the well architected and design elements of what you're doing, that's the reason it's important to have the right skills. And I'll just, in closing, say I mentioned before that the governors and the state legislators, I do think, have an opportunity to set the agenda here and really prioritize cybersecurity for their governments and constituents. And in turn, this is going to really help drive building that cybersecurity talent pool. And companies like AWS, and Todd as the CEO here, we're going to stand ready to support the state governments and accelerate this effort. For us, like Todd, we have existing programs. A lot of them are free. They're not even, like, we'll help. We can also design. We want to work with the universities. This is really about a partnership at the end of the day, that we are working together between private and public sector to develop this and to protect our states and our nation. And I'll tell you, it is so refreshing to see Governor Hutchinson take this on at the NGA and say, we're going to make this a priority with what you're doing. And I think all the governors can really learn from each other. And if they have something that's working, share it and scale it, not redesign what's being done, because experimentation is one of the best things that you can do in each state. And the last thing, Tim, is access. We've got to make sure, and I would say the new federal administration, if they could help do one thing for everybody, is make sure that every state has access to the internet and the ability to train wherever they are.
Thank you for that, Teresa. Really appreciate that. Governor Hutchinson, would you like to close us out with some final comments?
Well, I'll just second that last point about investment in high-speed internet. We're working hard to get that to our rural communities. Coronavirus has taught us how critical that is. Let me just end by saying we think of these as tech jobs. They're technical skills, but we also have to expose our young people, our students, those that are entering this field, into the realm of policy and ethics. And I think you're going to see that as an ongoing debate in the coming years, and we're going to have to grapple with that. It is a part of this educational system in technology. It is policy, it is ethics, and how we conduct ourselves on this global enterprise called the internet. So great to be with you today. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Governor. And thanks for taking time, to each of you out of your busy schedules, to join us. Really appreciate hearing from each of you and learning more about your perspective. So thanks for joining us at our fourth ever State Summit on Cybersecurity. Appreciate it, and have a good rest of your day.